One of the things I want to say is people often ask me how I sort of started collecting, and what I tell people is that I started buying art when I was really in my early 20s, just because I always liked pretty things, and so at some point they became, not posters but art. But I didn't really I thought of myself as someone who bought art, but I didn't think of myself as a collector until I moved to St. Louis, and it really was working with the Art Museum, and especially with Friends of African American Art, this wonderful group here that really kind of helped me begin to think about what I already had and what I was going to buy in a much more, I think, sort of strategic and deep way into thinking about it as a collection. And I'm especially excited about Graphic Revolutions and having some of my pieces in the show, because the arc of time for Graphic Revolutions really overlaps with some of the best, I think, some of the best eras in African American art making. Right, so the 50s. African Americans have been making art since we were brought to this country, but really, you find African American access to and sort of just the expansion of the genres and the media and all the different kinds of art really expanding in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and of course the contemporary era. So I'm really excited about this show because of the overlap with Black art. So I'm excited to go through with you all.
So the entrance is on that side. And we're first going to focus on this work by Kara Walker called Keys to the Coop from 1997, which is a sort of early work of hers that was published by Landfall Press. It's from 1997, is the year that Kara Walker, she had already been doing her silhouettes for a couple of years. In 1997 is the year she was both in the Whitney Biennial, and then she was also awarded with the MacArthur so-called Genius Grant. So she really kind of burst onto the contemporary scene in a very strong and forceful way. This work is a liner cut, so it's a relief print that is very beautifully suited to her sort of chosen medium of the silhouette. So you get this very stark kind of black and white. And now I think I'm going to turn it to Adrienne to talk a little bit about Walker and maybe the subject matter and background.
Sure. And I have a complicated relationship with her work. I own one of her pieces, and when we get to it, I can kind of explain the context of it. So she, I think, fits into a really kind of almost underappreciated tradition within African American art. Obviously, African Americans, from the moment that we arrived in this country, it was a national tradition. Before it was a nation, it was an American tradition to completely exploit and oppress and subordinate African Americans in some of the worst ways that human history has ever seen. And so it's not surprising then that a lot of African American art would be about trying to recover the human dignity of African Americans. And so a lot of African American art from the beginning until today continues to really be about, I think, sort of a profound kind of portraiture that captures African American human dignity. And you see that in a lot of the great African American artists, and it's exciting to see that in this moment of Black portraiture with Kehinde Wiley and with Amy Sherrod during the Obama's portraits. So this is a very different tradition, right? And she's really capturing kind of this, it's not about representing African Americans in ways that are respectful, it's about really kind of almost undermining this idea of respect. And a lot of the images are it's almost making fun of the ways that Black people, and especially Black women, have been demeaned. So a lot of the images, like when you look at this one, I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, but like, what do you see when you look at this image? And I do want to call attention to the fact, because I think it frequently gets lost with Kara Walker, that she is one of the best technical draftspeople. In addition to being a compelling conceptual artist, if you look at sort of the fineness of the lines that she manages to capture, she's just one of the best technical artists of her generation. Lori?
I was going to say, you had asked about this image, so she could either be eating a piece of corn on the cob or something, or she'd be giving someone fellatio. I mean, it's got this phallic kind of symbol that I think, to your point about Black women being exploited, particularly sexually, that could be part of that.
It looks kind of like the chicken head, right? That she's doing, and so a lot of people, it's not clear what's happening here. It's not clear, is she running towards something? Is she running away from something? Is she the victim? Is she the person who's killed the chicken? What are the keys to? Has she stolen the keys? What is she trying to free somebody with the keys? And so for a lot of people, there's uncomfortable with this because people prefer certainty when we think about race and subordination, right? And so Kara Walker really turns all of that on its head. But the other thing that she's doing is she's presenting African Americans in a way that is not attractive, right? And the only way that you can really understand, so she's doing silhouettes. The only way you can really understand the people as Black or white is by the phenotypes, right? So the only reason we think of this, why do we even think of, how many of you understand this person as black, as opposed to a different race? So Tony's not going to raise his hand, right? Okay. So why? Why do you understand this person as black compared to?
Hair, it's like broad features, the nose, right? Just all of it.
The big lips. So
Right.
everything that's used to stereotype black people as unattractive. Like, this is not a beautiful depiction of a black woman with natural hair. And so for a lot of people, they don't like this depiction that forces us to understand this person as black through features that we don't necessarily see as attractive, right? So she's controversial for that reason as well. But she, I think, really fits really well within a tradition of sort of the beautiful ugly, or the jolie laid, is part of a tradition that African American artists have tried to work with, right? And the understanding that even within deep ugliness, you can find profound beauty, right? And that's very much part of the African American tradition, that your life circumstances can be appalling, but that doesn't make you less than human, right? You can still find beauty, you can still find dignity within it. So she's a very complex artist, and I certainly can't do her justice. But I'll just say that she was so controversial that when she won her MacArthur Genius Award, some of the senior black women artists actually launched a campaign against her, a very public campaign. And they wrote letters. They demanded that her MacArthur Genius Award be revoked, because they felt that she was profoundly undermining African American art. And they felt that the art market was valuing her so much precisely because the images that she was putting out were devaluing black people. So they did successfully get some of her exhibitions and shows shut down. And these are amazing black women artists like Betty Starr, who we're going to see in a minute, and Howardina Kendall. So I love her and her work, because even though I'm ambivalent about the actual project, I think she has had some of the biggest influence on contemporary African American art, and sort of helped to open up the genre and helped to open up the range of representations that's permissible and spark a lot of great conversations. So, yeah.
Is it also a riff on the 17th, 18th century and 19th century tradition of people of not such great wealth who can't afford portraits I'm talking about the white community, had their silhouettes?
Absolutely. So she's using, that's a great point, she's using that late 18th century, early 19th century silhouette, which was a way of capturing, it was an inexpensive way of having your personal portraiture. We've all probably seen, the George Washington silhouettes, now they're on the coins and everything. But of course, in all of those silhouettes, people captured very fine lines, right? And probably if they didn't have a perfect nose, they probably told the artist to make the nose perfect. So she's doing the silhouette, she's playing with that genre, I think, in really important and challenging ways, but she's doing it, she's using it to depict people in ways that we would not see conventionally as attractive. So should we, I don't know if you have other comments about this one.
So I want to talk a little bit about this, the print over here, this gorgeous color print, which is from the Ollie collection, which was donated by Ron and Monique Ollie just a year ago. And this is the one print in the exhibition that's dated 1960. So it's kind of wonderful thing that makes our subtitle not a lie. But it's also it's a beautiful and sort of technically incredible work of art. It's a lithograph. It's by Robert Blackburn, who is important not only for being an important and fascinating artist and an African American artist. He was born in 1920, sort of in the heart of the Harlem Renaissance. As a young man, he was introduced to printmaking, and that passion kind of took over.